In section 1-9b, we are going to look at the location and operation of transformations with a function and identify what they are without graphing them. Yesterday you graphed functions and decided what they were. So I just want to remind you that you need to think location, 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 and operation. And then I'm just going to put OP for operation, operation. Well, I guess we'll spell it out. Okay. Now, functions are going to behave similar to what points did, but there's one huge difference between points and functions. So let's just kind of look at this diagram here. If we have our parent function, which is x, so this is what we're dealing with, this is going to be linear. If we are multiplying out in front of the x, that's going to indicate that it's a stretch or compression. If we're adding or subtracting after the translation, or after the x, it's going to represent a slide or a translation. Now, vertical and horizontal were easy to see with points. When we had points, we had x, y. Oops, let me slide that down a little bit. And we knew based on the location, it was going to be, our x was going to be horizontal, and our y was going to be vertical. Okay, now, the location is also important in a function, but it's just a little bit different. So, if we go down to this next example, we have transformations on cubic or quadratic, cubic, square root, and what happens with them is we're going to have some parentheses. So I call these parentheses the horizontal house of horror. Horizontal house inside the parentheses means anything that goes on inside there is horizontal, and it can only be horizontal or vertical. So if it's inside the horizontal house of horror, the parentheses, it's horizontal. If it's outside, it's going to be vertical. Again, it can just be one or the other. The reason why I call this the horizontal house of horror is because the numbers in here don't behave like you think they will. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. Okay, so outside in front of the parentheses, it's not in the horizontal house, so that makes it vertical. If we're multiplying, it's going to be a stretch. If we're adding or subtracting after the parentheses, it's going to be a vertical translation. Inside the parentheses, everything is horizontal, unless we're talking about a reflection, but we're not doing those today. So horizontal stretch or compression would be inside here, in front of the x, and a translation would be after the x. Now, if you notice here, I said you need to flip your number and then decide if, and what I'm talking about is decide if it's a stretch or compression. And here, you have to take the opposite to decide if it's going left or right. So that's the horizontal house of horror. The number does not behave like you think it did or will based on what you know about points. So let me give you a couple of examples. If we have f of x equals x squared minus 3, there's no horizontal house of horrors. We don't have any parentheses. So since it isn't inside the horizontal house of horrors, the only thing that it can be is vertical. And just like with points, when we subtract, it's a translation. And if we subtract 3 from the function, it's going to be a vertical translation, and it's going to go down 3. Okay, so that behaves pretty much like it did with points. So now what we're going to do is we're going to say f of x equals, and then inside here I'm going to put x minus 3, and then I'm going to square it. So now the minus 3 is inside. It's inside the horizontal house of horrors. So because it's inside that house, and if you want to go like that, you can make it a little house if you want to. Because it's inside that horizontal house, we have to take the opposite because the numbers do not appear like you think, or do not behave like you think they would. So if this says a minus 3, we're going to think plus 3. So we know it's horizontal. We know because it's a subtraction that it's a translation. You think it's going to be a -3, but it's actually, we take the opposite, and if it's a +3, it's going to move to the right 3. Anything in the horizontal house does opposite of what you think it does. All right, so let's do another example off to the side here, and let's do a stretch. If I have, and we're going to make these g of x because a lot of times your functions, the parent functions are represented by f of x, and I should have made this g of x because they are transformed. Okay, so let's do another one off to the side here. We're going to do g of x equals 3x squared. Okay, now we're multiplying here, so we know that has to be a stretch or compression, and the location is in front of the x squared and not in the horizontal house of horrors, so it's not horizontal, which makes it vertical. Again, it can just be one or the other. We're multiplying, so we have to decide between stretch or compression. Since this number is larger than 3, it's going to be a vertical stretch, and then we have to say by how much? By a factor of 3. Now I'm going to change this just a little bit, and I'm going to say 3x squared. Okay, just a little bitty change there. Now we're in the horizontal house of horrors. So we know we're multiplying. It has to be a stretch or compression. We know we're in the horizontal house, so it's horizontal. Before I make my decision, I'm going to take this number, take the reciprocal of it. So I want to think one-third, and that number is in between 0 and 1, so instead of being a stretch like it looks like it would be, it's going to be a compression, horizontal compression by a factor of 1/3. Okay, let's do an example here. We have the parent function, which is f of x equals x cubed, and here it's not in the horizontal house, so that indicates that it's going to be vertical. Operation is adding 3, so when we add 3, it's a translation, and when it's vertical, again, remember it's just up or down, so for adding 3, we're going to go up 3. Over here, this is inside the horizontal house of horrors, so we're going to say that it's horizontal, and you're going to think -4. So horizontal, because it's adding, it's a translation, but we want to think that it's -4 instead of +4. So it's a horizontal translation. We think it's supposed to go to the right 4 because of what we know about points, but horizontal house of horrors, we take the opposite, think -4, so that means it's going to go left 4. This is not in the horizontal house, so that makes it vertical. And again, because we are subtracting, that's going to be a translation. And vertical is just up or down. Remember, I told you to think of vertical. And what you see is what you get with vertical. So if it says -5, it's going to go down 5. Okay, you have a couple to try.